Hey, my name is Itai and welcome to another video about getting started with Bit. In this video, we'll be learning a little bit more about component isolation and why it's important. In Bit, what we try to do always is build independent reusable components. The way Bit helps us do that is Bit helps us understand whether a component can be thoroughly modeled with complete dependency graphs and configuration in order to be reused across projects. Back in our IDE, and let's show all of this in practice. So I'm back in my IDE, and in this project, as a reminder, we have three components, our environment, and then my first and second React components. As you see here, we have my first component imports my second component. The way for us to understand whether components are isolated is by running the bit status command. Bit status is also a good workflow command to understand the current state of your workspace. If you have any issues, if there's anything that Bit feels may break, it triggers a warning here. It ensures that all component information is able to be modeled correctly and shared using different tools. We see here that we have the OK status information on all of the components, and let's start modifying items to see how things modify. So the first isolation between components is all about import statements, because as long as we are in the context of a single component with no dependencies, it's always easy, it's always isolated. Here, we have an absolute import call on my second component. And the way this works, if you remember, is by parsing from node modules. This means that the component, my first component, does not have any specific requirements or side effects needed from file system structure. But now let's see what happens if I change the import statement to be a relative import statement. Okay. And now let's run bit status. Okay. So here, as you see, Bit complains on our first isolation issue, relative imports. The reason why relative imports are not healthy for components is they require components to be near each other. However, when components are installed as dependencies, we don't know exactly how things will be placed in the file system. So having a link through an absolute path in node modules makes things much more abstract and reusable between different projects. Now, let's quickly change back and let's save, let's run bit status once more and see that the issue is in fact resolved. Now, I mentioned earlier that Bit also try to help you not break any barriers of APIs. One of them can be about importing internals of other components. So let's see what happens if I try to import an internal file. Status. And here, Bit complains that I'm importing my non-main file. As a reminder, our main files are the index file. The index file should roll out all of our exports. So if you happen yourself needing to import from an internal implementation file, maybe it's a good idea to move this API to be public, or maybe even extract this to another component. Let's change back to a healthy state. And a next issue in dependencies is, let's see how Bit helps us understand code smells and others. So you see here that we have my first component depends on my second component. Now, what will happen if my second component depends on my first component? Let's change this to this, save, and Bit status. You see here that Bit understands that I'm now creating a circular dependency between my components. Now, while in a normal code base, this is perfectly fine, but whenever we create independent components, having these cyclic dependencies can be overridden and be enabled. By default, Bit will break your builds by doing so. So let me delete this import statement. Whenever usually you have this import cyclic dependency situation, then maybe it's a good idea to refactor something, move something to a different component, or any other solution. Let's delete that. Last but not least, Let's see what happens if I try to import a dependency that is not available in my workspace. So in this case, I want to try and import Lambda. Okay, so let's run this status. Now we see that Bit understands that there is this import call, but Bit is unable to resolve the dependency from the install.modules and cannot find Lambda in our workspace JSON. This is, again, an isolation issue because Bit is unable to understand which version of Lambda we want to depend on. So there's two ways to fix that. First of all, I can run bit install with --add missing deps or add missing dependencies, or I can just bit install Lambda. In this case, let's use these nifty new features, bit install add missing dependencies. Essentially, no matter how many import statements you have, you can just code away and just run this quick feature, and Bit will bring all the dependencies needed to your workspace, sorry, to have things running as expected. Let's give it a few seconds. Great. All right, now let's run the status. And we'll see here that we are able to get all components properly isolated and available. So we know that our components are healthy, we can share them, they are completely reusable, they're not doing any hacks or anything that may be in the wrong with them. Thank you so much for listening.